The Khanate of Kazan was a medieval Bulgarian Tatar-Turkic state which occupied the territory of former Volga Bulgaria between 1438 and 1552. Its Khans were the patrilineal descendants of Tuft-Emir, the 13th son of Jochi and grandson of Genghis Khan. The Khanate covered contemporary Tatarstan, Mariel, Chuvashir, Mordovia, parts of Udmurtia and Bashkortostan. Its capital was the city of Kazan. It was one of the successor states of the Golden Horde, and it came to an end when it was conquered by the Tsardom of Russia. Khanate geography and population. The territory of the Khanate comprised the Muslim Bulgar-populated lands of Bulgar, Khanate, Kazan, Kasan duchies and other regions that originally belonged to Volga Bulgaria. The Volga, Kama and Vyatka were the main rivers of the Khanate, as well as the major tradeways. The majority of the population were Kazan Tatars. Their self-identity was not restricted to Tatars. Many identified themselves simply as Muslims or as the people of Kazan. Islam was the state religion. According to the Genghis tradition, the local Turkic tribes were also called Tatars by the steppe nobility and, later, by the Russian elite. Part of the higher nobility hailed from the Golden Horde. It included members of 4 leading noble families: Argin, Barin, Kipchak, and Shirin. Peoples subject to the Khan included the Chuvash, Mari, Mordva, Tatar Misha, Udmurt, and Bashkir. The Permians and some of the Komi tribes were also incorporated into the Khanate. The Mishis had arrived during the period of the Golden Horde and gradually assimilated the resident Finnic Mordvins and Burtis. Their territory was governed by former steppe Tatars. Some of the Misha duchies were never controlled from Kazan and instead gravitated towards the Kashim Khanate or Muscovite Russia. Most of the Khanate territory was covered by forests, and only the southern part adjoined the steppe. The main population of the steppes were the nomadic Manghites, also known as Nogais, who sometimes recognized the rule of the Kazan Khan, but more often raided agricultural Tatars and Chuvash, as they had done in the Golden Horde period. Later, Nogais were transplanted and replaced with Kalmyks. More recently, this area was settled by Tatars, Chuvash and Russians, who erected defensive walls to guard the southern border. Since the Khanate was established, Tatar Cossack troops defended the Khanate from the Nogais. Russian sources indicate that at least 5 languages were used in the Kazan Khanate. The first and foremost was the Tatar language, including the middle dialect of the Kazan Tatars and the western dialect of the Mishis. Its written form was the favored language of the state. The Chuvash language was a descendant of the Bulgar language, spoken by the pagan Chuvash people. The Bulgar language also strongly influenced the middle dialect of Tatar language. The other 3 were probably the Mari language, the Mordvin languages and the Bashkir language, likewise developed from the Bulgar and Kipchak languages. Economics. The Khanate's urban population produced clayware, wood and metal handiworks, leather, armor, plows and jewels. The major cities included Kazan, Arka, Kukata, Kasan, Kali, Alat and Kori. The urban population also traded with the people of Central Asia, the Caucasus, and Russia. In the 16th century, Russia became the main trading partner of Kazan, and the Khanate shared the economic system of Moscow. The major markets were the Tasaryk Bazaar in Kazan and the Markizyle Fair on the Volga River. Agricultural land ownership was based on the soygal and hereditary estates. Society. The Khan governed the state. He based his actions on decisions and consultations of a cabinet council, or divan. The nobility comprised the ranks of Bak, Amir, and Morza. Military estates consisted of the Uglan, Bahadur, Iki. Muslim clergy also played a major role. They were divided into Sayat, Sayak, Qazi, and Imams. The ulema or clergy played a judicial role, and maintained the madrasas and maktabs. The majority of the population comprised Kharazalik, a free Muslim population, who lived on state land. The feudal lands were mostly settled by Kura. Prisoners of war were usually sold to Turkey or into Central Asia. Occasionally they were sold within the Khanate as slaves and sometimes were settled on feudal lands to become Kura later. The non-Muslim population of the Khanate had to pay the yasak, administration and military. The Khanate was divided into 5 daruga: Alit, Arka, Gerek, Kori and Nugay. The term daruga translates as direction. They replaced the duchies that the Khanate originated from. Some feudal lords sporadically asserted independence from Kazan, but such attempts would be promptly suppressed. The military of the Khanate consisted of armament and men from the Darfurs and subject lands, Khan guards, and the troops of the nobility. The number of soldiers was never constant, ranging from 20,000 to 60,000 in number. Often, troops from Nogay, the Crimea and Russia also served the Kazan Khans. Firearms were used for defending the walls of Kazan. Culture. In general, the culture of the Kazan Khanate descended from that of Volga Bulgaria. Cultural elements of the Golden Horde were also present in noble circles. A large part of the urban population was literate. Large libraries were present in mosques and madrasas. Kazan became a center of science and theology. Although Islamic influence predominated, lay literature also developed. The most prominent Old Tatar language poets were Moximadiar, Omi Kamal, Moximad Amin, Garif Bek, and Olsarif. Moximadiar renovated the traditions of Kazan poetry, and his verses were very popular. The city of Bulga retained its position as a sacred place, but had this function only due to the emergence of Kazan as a major economic and political center in the 1430s. The architecture of the Khanate is characterized by white stone architecture and wood carvings. History. The former territories of Volga Bulgaria may have regained a degree of independence within the disintegrating Golden Horde by the turn of the 15th century. The principality was self-governed and maintained a dynasty of Bulgar rulers. Whatever the status of this proto-state, the founder of the Khanate was Oleg Moxamat. It was in 1437 or 1438 that he assumed the title of Khan and usurped the throne of Kazan with some help from local nobility. It has been suggested that the transfer of power from the local Bulgar dynasty to Moxamat was finalized by his son Maxmud in 1445. Throughout its history, the Khanate was prone to civil turmoil and struggles for the throne. The Khans were replaced 19 times in 115 years. There were a total of 15 reigning Khans, some ascending the throne multiple times. The Khan was often elected from the Jengite sides by vernacular nobility and even by the citizens themselves. Early history. During the reign of Oleg Moxamat and his son Maxmud, Kazan forces raided Muscovy and its subject land several times. Vasily II of Moscow, engaged in the Great Feudal War against his cousins, was defeated in a battle near Suzdal, and was forced to pay ransom to the Kazan Khan. In July 1487, Grand Duke Ivan III of Moscow occupied Kazan and seated a puppet leader, Moximad Amin, on the Kazan throne. After that, the Kazan Khanate became a protectorate of Moscow and Russian merchants were allowed to trade freely throughout its territory. The supporters of a union with the Ottoman Empire and the Crimean Khanate tried to exploit the population's grievances to provoke revolts, but with negligible results. In 1521, Kazan emerged from the dominance of Moscow, concluding a mutual aid treaty with the Astrakhan Khanate, the Crimean Khanate and the Nogay Horde. The combined forces of Khan Muhammad Duray and his Crimean allies then attacked Muscovy and captured more than 150,000 slaves. Russian chronicles record about 40 attacks of Kazan Khans on the Russian territories in the first half of the 16th century. The final decade, the reinforcement of Crimea displeased the pro-Moscow elements of the Kazan Khanate, and some of these noblemen provoked a revolt in 1545. The result was the deposition of Safa Duray. a Moscow supporter, Tsar Gali, occupied the throne. Following that year, Moscow organized several campaigns to impose control over Kazan, but the attempts were unsuccessful. With the help of the Nogais, Safavidsharay returned to the throne. He executed 75 noblemen, and the rest of his opposition escaped to Russia. In 1549 he died, and his 3-year-old son Utamskarai was recognized as Khan. His regent and the de facto ruler of the Khanate was his mother Soyombika. The administration of the Irlan Koskak gained a degree of independence under her rule. At that time Safavidsharay's relatives were in Crimea. Their invitation to the throne of Kazan was vitiated by a large portion of vernacular nobility. Under Koskak's government, relations with Russia continued to worsen. A group of disgruntled noblemen at the beginning of 1551 invited a supporter of Tsar Ivan the Terrible, Tsar Gali, for the second time. At the same time, the lands to the east of the Volga River were ceded to Russia. Utamskarai, along with his mother, was sent to a Moscow prison. Tsar Gali occupied the Kazan throne until February 1552. Anti-Moscow elements in the Kazan government exiled Tsar Gali and invited the Astrakhan prince Yadigar Mokhsamid, along with the Nogais, to aid him. Downfall. Kazan was then put under siege. The forces of Ivan IV operated from the Russian castle of Svyazhsk. In August 1552, the Russians defeated the Tatar inland troops, burnt Arka and some castles. After 2 months of siege and destruction of the citadel walls on October 3, the Russians entered the city. Some defenders managed to escape, but most were put to the sword. Yadigar Mokhsamid was imprisoned and the population was slaughtered. The Kazan Chronicle reports about 110,000 killed, both civilians and garrison, and 100,000 Russians who had been kept captive in the Khanate released. After the fall of Kazan, territories such as Udmurtia and Bashkortostan joined Russia without a conflict. The Khanate administration was wiped out. Pro-Moscow and neutral nobles kept their lands, but others were executed. Tatars were then resettled far away from rivers, roads and Kazan. Free lands were settled by Russians and sometimes by pro-Russian Tatars. Orthodox bishops such as Germagen forcibly baptized many Tatars. Resistance until 1556, part of the population continued to resist Russian rule. The rebel governments were formed in Chalem and Mishatamak. But as the Nogais under Gali Akram often raided the agricultural population, the coalition went to ruin. After a brutal repression against the Kazan rebels, the commanders were executed. By some estimates, the population of the former Khanate declined by several thousands during the wars. The administration, known as the Kazan Palace's office, undertook the forced Russification and Christianization of the Tatars and other peoples. The term Tsardom of Kazan was in use until 1708 when the Kazan Governorate was formed. According to some scholars, the Khanate of Kazan was briefly restored during the time of troubles with the help of the ethnic Russian population, but Russian forces under the leadership of Kuzma Minin suppressed the rebellion.